Hi, and welcome to another author interview. I'm Brian Jacobson, one of the Associate Editors of Gastrointestinal Endoscopy. I'm here with Dr. Laiyemo from Howard University, who's going to be speaking with us today about his paper, Likelihood of Missed and Recurrent Adenomas in the Left versus Right Colon. First, can you tell us a little bit about the precursor trial that led to this, the polyp prevention trial?
Thank you very much. I'm actually very happy and excited to share the results of our work with the readers of gastrointestinal endoscopy. The parent trial, from which we got the data for our study, is actually the polyp prevention trial. The polyp prevention trial was a 4-year study, which is a dietary intervention trial. The big question that this trial sought to address was, if people change their diet so that they adopt a low-fat, high-fiber, high-fruit and vegetable diet, will that reduce the likelihood of recurrence of adenomatous polyps? That was the main question that the trial sought to address. So at baseline, they recruited about 2,000 people, and they randomized them into 2 groups. One group followed their usual dietary practices. The second group they adopted a low-fat, high-fruit vegetable, high-fiber diet. The trial was a 4-year trial. So everybody recruited into the trial needed to have had at least 1 adenoma removed from the colon, from a full colonoscopy. A year later, they were all to undergo a repeat colonoscopy, and the premise for that is to remove any adenoma that might have been missed at the baseline. Okay, so you have a adenoma colonoscopy at time 0 at the time of recruitment, another colonoscopy 1 year after, and then the end point of the trial was a colonoscopy, a full colonoscopy performed 4 years from baseline. So that you have colonoscopy at T0, at T1, and then at T4. The original trial, which was published in the New England Journal of Medicine in 2000, showed that the dietary intervention did not actually affect adenoma recurrence. So in this study, what we did was that recently there has been concern that colonoscopy is probably not as efficacious in reducing mortality from colorectal cancer in the proximal colon. And some of the ideas that suggestion was that maybe people are not doing as much of a good job in terms of identifying and removing polyps in the right colon. And some even question whether it is due to biology. So what we did in this study, given the opportunity that the parent trial has year 1 colonoscopy, which were by design to remove any missed lesion. So we decided to look at the differences that we see in terms of colonoscopy being at least more effective in the distal colon versus the proximal. Is this due to missed lesions, or is it due to propensity for recurrence, or both occurring in the right colon?
So your missed lesions were at the 1-year colonoscopy, and the recurrent were at the year 4 colonoscopy.
Exactly. So that was the question we sought to address with this, and we actually called it the big head bang theory.
The big head bang theory?
Head bang theory.
And why? What did you call it?
Because the issue is this: if people who have proximal adenoma were more likely to have recurrence, okay, that's one. It means colonoscopy, through no fault of it, may not be as effective, okay, in the proximal versus the distal. If people, regardless of where they have their original polyp, if they are more likely to have a recurrence in the right colon, then it means it will not, colonoscopy may appear to be less effective also in the right colon. Also, if you are more likely to miss lesions in the right, okay, so that compounds the likelihood that you keep finding things in the right colon. So that's why what we did at baseline, we looked at, in the original trial, 1,905 people finished the trial and had colonoscopy at baseline, and they had the endpoint colonoscopy also. So we excluded those who we couldn't identify where their polyps were. So we were left with about 1,800 people. Okay. So what we did, we categorized them into whether you have distal only polyp, whether you have proximal only polyp, and if you have polyps in both locations. So, and what our study showed was that those who have proximal polyp at baseline, they were more likely to have missed lesions. Okay. Those missed lesions were more likely to be in the right. And at year 4 colonoscopy, they were also more likely to have recurrence, and those recurrences were also more likely to be in the right.
Okay, so both issues were
Both
very
issues.
real, and both were related to being proximal polyps to begin with.
Exactly. Exactly.
Do you think this has, does this implicate biology of the polyps?
Although this is just one study, because previous studies that have attempted to look at missed adenoma, they have been either tandem back-to-back colonoscopy, and there's no follow-up data. So our study showed, in terms of assessing missed polyps, and at the same time, the impact on recurrence. So what we did in this study, given the fact that there was a year interval between the baseline colonoscopy and the colonoscopy that determined missed lesions, we also considered the fact that those lesions we found at T1 a year later may actually be recurrent, because nobody knows how quickly anybody can have recurrence. So we did a sensitivity analysis. All the polyps found at year 1, we added them to the baseline and then compared them to T4 to see the distribution. And we also took the polyps found at T1 and considered them as recurrent lesions, and we added them to T4 lesions, and it did not make any difference. Regardless of how we did the analysis, the distal polyps, they keep reducing. Proximal polyps keep increasing relative to the distal. And if anybody has a proximal polyp, you are more likely to have a missed lesion, and you are also more likely to have recurrence.
Wow. Well, thank you. This was very robust findings, and I think this may have some implications in the future in how we think about surveillance and obviously performing very good quality colonoscopies up front. Thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much. Nice for I'm happy for I'm grateful to the gastrointestinal endoscopy for allowing us to share our work.